Chilling out here with my friends Jacob and Seth in the room, and we never want to miss a moment to just have some fun dialogue about the things that people might not talk about, and so we want to explore them. Today, just for a couple of minutes, we want to talk about some of those cultural tensions that happen with natural responses, and the reason we say they're natural is because it's just the way we respond based on our past, based on our experiences, based on our background. And even though it may be a natural response, sometimes people take it personally. And Jacob, I'm going to end up asking you what that means to you. Sure. But I know that there are times, not only myself, but others that play in these multicultural spaces where we have to do some code switching, right? Yeah. Code switching meaning that, let me just make it real raw. So if I'm black and I'm in an all white room, I don't necessarily have to be white, right? But I can't be all the way black because I have to make sure that I'm fitting into the environment. But to not talk about code switching, let's just talk about some of the responses that happen that maybe feels like tension, but it's kind of, just our cultural communication. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, and honestly, it reminds me of this book that I am like neck deep in right now. It's Austin Channing Brown's I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. And it really has me reliving lots of my own experiences where I have just dropped the ball, basically. The majority of my work experience and life experience has been in white world.
Yeah.
And so when I interact with people that don't come from that perspective or just share a different cultural worldview and a different way of responding, I have to constantly remind myself that just because they respond differently than I'm used to doesn't mean that it's less valuable or that it shouldn't be welcomed, right? Sure. I need to make sure that I'm taking into consideration the amount of effort that those folks are having to go through in their own mind of how do I say this in a way that's welcome in this space?
Sure.
Because that's something that I just don't, that's part of my privilege. I don't have to do that, and I forget how labor intensive and emotionally straining that can be. Especially if you're in a work environment or a friendship or whatever, where you're constantly telling people, we're family, everybody's perspective is welcome here. And the minute somebody addresses something or shares a thought in a way that's different than the rest of the room would share it, how do we make sure that we're still creating room for them to be naturally who they are and to still support it just as much as anybody else in that room? Does that make sense?
It does. And you talk about the ways that you respond differently. Now, Seth, you're with City Gospel Mission, and prior to that, I know you served in multiple spaces. So you're always in the game around different populations and different color tones.
Sure.
Do you experience that much, or even in a makeup of, here at City Gospel, having so many different types of individuals? Does that ever come into play?
So the thing with me is that I find myself living in a space in which I didn't grow up. So I grew up in the country, essentially, in a small town of about 1,500 people, where it was pretty homogenous, and it was all I ever knew. And then when I moved to Cincinnati, everything was different because I was in the heart of Price Hill, which, as you know, is a pretty diverse community.
Sure.
There are Latino people living there. There are African Americans and urban Appalachian people, white people who have just come together in this space.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of learning to do, and I was naive in my 20s to understand what those things were. And it takes a lot of asking questions. And even now, having spent the better part of a decade doing ministry in urban areas, living in an urban area, I still have to check myself.
Sure.
Because I still expect my experience to translate into different environments. But that only works with people that I know well. So I forget that sometimes where I have these relationships that I've worked hard to make.
Sure.
That doesn't translate when I meet new people. And so I've always got to remember that and keep that at the top of my mind. When I get into these networking spaces and when I'm meeting new people, we're like-minded in a lot of ways.
Sure.
It takes time to unravel that stuff and to figure it out.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. Well, I know that quite often it feels like it's the minority person, not even necessarily a person of color. It could be a woman,
Right.
It
Yeah.
could be an introvert, but that person that doesn't feel like they're part of the greater club or the greater grouping. And so when they respond, culture comes into play and isolation comes into play. And so it's so important that we don't squash out
Right. Yeah.
that individual
Yeah.
in our response. How do we help people be aware or sensitive to those folks in the room?
Right. I mean, I can't say for everybody, but like in me, the places where I've tripped up the most have been when I've responded out of fear, and insecurity to those things. And for the folks who walk into a room that are visibly different, right? People of color, women, folks that are in the transgender community, like all of that stuff. There are so many additional filters that they're having to like walk through to gain a lot of times to gain the courage to be able to speak. And if it creates tension, if the way I try to think about it is if they are willing to climb that mountain, right, of like walking through in their mind, should I say something? Should I not say something? Should I say something? Should I not say something? And they're brave enough to speak in a room that's so different, that's filled with people so different than them. Then my insecurity is ridiculous compared to that stuff, right? Like those things should never squash the sharing of ideas and perspectives. That doesn't mean that just because somebody says something, no matter who it is, that it's right? But like if they're willing to contribute to a dialogue, the places where I have made the most mistakes have been when I feel that tension, responding out of that insecurity and fear, as opposed to responding out of a perspective of abundance in the reality that everybody can contribute to this.
Sure.
Sure.
And it could be like a person, they're in the room, like, yeah, man, you know what I'm saying? So what I'm saying, dude, is when I'm in my hood, right? I mean, the people that are coming there, and someone starts talking like that, and there are other folks that be like, they've checked out. Because in their mind, that person does not have the same level of intellect, interpersonal skills, or education to even qualify them to be in the room.
Which couldn't be further from the truth. Like we all know that. Couldn't be further from the truth. And this is where I think that like the teaching of Jesus about the other person comes into play, where he is consistently encouraging us to get out of our comfort zone and to be part of something that we don't know. You can't know what you don't know. And so just this idea of, and this is the thing that I always think of when we're in those spaces, when we're going through those things and dealing with those emotions, the thought that I always place in my head, whether it's someone, a person of color, someone from the LGBT community, it doesn't matter. In my head, I have to think either this is for everybody, or it's for nobody.
Oh, that's good.
That's good. That's good, man. And honestly, like thinking about the way in which different people communicate and creating space for it, like folks who focus on cultural linguistics have told us that like there are specific accents that we attribute character traits to, right? Regardless of what it is they're saying. Like we know that like British people are always assumed to be smarter. like most cultures hear British accent and associate intelligence with it. Whereas like if you've got a real Southern drawl, sometimes that's associated with like not as much intelligence, which we know isn't the truth.
Yeah.
But the reality is like it's that tension, right? That idea that Christ is constantly repeating in our minds and in our spirits that like God is at work in everybody. The movements of God are happening in everyone, which means that we need to shut up and listen more than we talk, right? And when we're quick to respond in those ways, we need to check ourselves of, is it coming? And I just keep coming back to this thing because it's been true for me. Is it coming out of a place of fear, a path of fear, or is it coming out of a path of God, right?
Yeah.
Where it sees humanity and God's presence at work in everybody.
Yeah, that's true. And here's the other thing. We need to check our posture. Because your postures can dictate or project whether somebody does respond or, the flavor in how they respond. So it doesn't even have to be somebody of color. It could be a dominant male room with one woman in there, right?
We had that.
And everybody knows. Right. So you guys got your. And so as soon as the woman speaks, it's almost like, oh, the woman is speaking, right? And you're right. The posture, you've already laid back. It's almost as if you're an outsider. We're letting you in the room.
Right.
We're gonna let you talk.
You got 2 minutes.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes. You got.
Right.
It's posture.
It's true, man. Yeah.
So, I think that's the other thing that, if we could share, we want to make sure that we're always checking our posture when we're in the room with others, so that others can feel like they're part of the room.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anything else?
No, I mean, I think that when because I get to follow you around. Like anytime people talk,
that's good enough.
Anytime people ask Fred about like what does reachable reconciliation look like, there are these big picture conversations that he has and that he can have with anybody. But really, what they mean is when my black friend makes me uncomfortable, what do I do with that? Like for real, and so it's these practical things, these really practical conversations that I think are so important to say like. There's a better way for us to respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
And we look forward to any responses, comments you may have, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.